In today's exercise, I've given you 16 notes on the scale that you need to find. Now, I've written these as half notes, but you can just play these however you would like. You can just print out the PDFs and write these out and then check the answers PDF to see if you are right, or you can stick with me and I'll play them all through. Okay, so let's play all these through to see if you got them right. We're starting off in the treble clef, so this is the right hand. The first note is an E, then we're moving to a C, then we have a G, next is an E, then we have a D, then a B, then an A, and lastly a D. So next we move into the bass clef. So let's have a look at what notes we've got here. Well, it starts right at the bottom on a G. And then it moves to an E. And then we go to a B. And then we come down to a G. And then we're all the way down to an F. And then up to a D. And then down to a C, and then up to an F. In today's exercise, I've given you 16 more notes for you to find on the stave. So you can either print out the PDFs and check your answers against the answer PDF, or you can stick with me here and I'll play them all through. So pause the video and give them a go. Okay, so let's go through all of these notes. We're in the treble clef to start with, and we're on a C, middle C. And then we move up an octave to a higher C. And then we move down to an F. And then we move up an octave again to an F. And then we come down to G. And then we're moving up another octave all the way up to the G. And then we're coming down to a D, and then up to an E. Then we move on into the bass clef with our left hand, and we're starting on a low E. This isn't the E beneath, here's middle C here. It's not this E, we're coming all the way down to this E. So this is where we're starting. The second note is then the E above it, so an octave higher. Then we come down to an A, and then we move up the octave to the A above it, and then we're coming down to a B, and then we move up the octave to the B above it, and then we come down to an F, and then up to a G. In today's exercise, I've created 2 lines of music, one in the treble clef, one in the bass clef, using notes that go off the stave, so using ledger lines. So give these a go. You can just print out the PDFs and write out your answers and then check against the answers PDF, or you can stick with me here and I'll play them through with you when you come back. Okay, so let's give these a go. We are starting on the treble clef in the right hand. Now this is quite a high note here. So the best way to start with this is to realise that the very top line of the stave is an F, not the F above middle C, the F above that. And then you count up from that top line, F, G, A, B, C, D. So you should get to this high D, and that's where we're starting. And this is 2 Ds higher than middle C, which is down here. So we start on this D, then we're coming down to a B, and then we're going up one to a C, and then we're coming down to an A, and then we're going back to a C, and then we come down to a B, and then we're reaching that high D again, and then we're coming down to an A. And then we move on to the bass clef with our left hand. So here we can start off at middle C, which is the line above the stave, and count up from there. And you should have got to an F. So always starting on middle C when you're above the bass clef stave, and count up from middle C. So we start on F, we come down to a D, we go up to an E, we're then coming down to that middle C, which is nice and easy to see. We're then going back to an E, we then come down to the D, we're then going up to an F, and then we come down to the middle C again. In today's exercise, I've created 2 lines of music, one in the treble clef and one in the bass clef. These are all off the stave, so these ones are beneath the stave using ledger lines. You need to name these 16 notes. So you can just print out the PDFs and check your answers against the answers PDF, or you can stick with me and I will take you through them. Okay, so let's take a look at these notes. First off, it's the treble clef with the right hand. And if they're below the stave, you'd usually always count your way down from the middle C. So you can see where middle C should be, the line under the stave. And we're going down, B, A, and we land on G. So this first note is a G. And then you're moving up 2 to a B. And then we're coming up to that middle C. Easy to see. Then we're coming down 2 to the A, and then we're coming down 1 to a G, and then we're coming up again to an A, and then we're up 1 more to the B, and we end on that G beneath middle C. Okay, so in this second line, we're using the bass clef and we're looking at the notes below the bass clef. So I've moved my camera. This is now middle C here. And then we're coming all the way down to C below it. But actually, all these notes are down here, very, very low. 3 C's below middle C. So the best way to count these notes under the stave is to know that that first ledger line underneath the bass clef stave is an E. So this is this very low E here. And from there, you can count down. So for this very first note, if we imagine our finger is on that first little ledger line underneath the stave, that would be the E. You would come down to the D, down to the second line, which is the C, and then land on our note, which is this B here. So our first note on this bass clef is this B. We're then moving up 2, so the next note will be a D. And then we're coming up to that first ledger line beneath the stave, which we already know is an E. We then move 2 down, which is the C. We're then 1 down, which is a B. We're coming back up 1 to the C. We're then moving up 1, which is to the D. And then we're ending back on that low B. In today's exercise, I've created 2 lines of music, one in the treble clef, one in the bass clef, and we're just moving between notes that are off the stave. So you can just download the PDFs and write out your answers and check them against the PDF answer sheet, or you can stay with me and I will go through these with you. So pause the video and give them a go. Okay, so to start, our first note is E, and it's a high E. This is middle C down here, which would be just below the treble clef stave. So it's not this first E, because that would be the bottom line of the stave. It's this E at the top, so you'd have to count your way up from middle C to find it. After this E, we're coming all the way down to the B that's just below middle C. And then we're actually moving up 2 octaves. There's the first octave, there's the second octave to land at this high B. We then come down to an F, and then we're going to come all the way down, right the way below middle C to a G. And then we're going to come all the way up to a high C. So we're going to move 2 octaves here. We've moved past middle C, past the C above that, and ended up at this very high C at the top. And then we're actually moving back down to middle C. And then the last note is that high E. Okay, so moving on to the second line of music, which is the bass clef. So this is our left hand. Let's have a look at what all these notes are. So it starts on a low D. So here's the middle C, which would be above the clef. I've moved my piano. So we're actually coming down to this D. So that first note is a D. We are then moving down 6 to an F. And then from here, we're moving down 4 to a C. Then moving up 5 to a G. And then we're jumping all the way up to a note above middle C, and that's an E. And then we're coming down to a B. And then we're coming down an octave to another B. And then we're coming down another octave to this very low B at the end.